The luxurious SUV glided down the deserted road, a dark silhouette in the night that swallowed the headlights' glow. At the wheel, the rich woman, her face as cold as the car's polished metal, felt a jolt. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't a pothole. It was her mother, the frail, forgotten widow she had accidentally encountered in the middle of nowhere. An icy smile curved her lips. Nature will take care of it, she thought, as she sped away, leaving behind the inert body and the promise of a cruel fate. The elderly woman lay on the asphalt, pain throbbing, the night's chill beginning to bite. Abandonment was the final sentence. But fate, at times, has unexpected guardians. From the shadows of the forest, an imposing figure emerged, a white spectre under the moonlight. An albino tiger, its deep blue eyes fixed on the fallen woman. There was no hunger, only a strange and ancestral understanding of fragility. With a delicacy that belied its savage strength, the tiger approached, and with its powerful yet gentle mouth, dragged the widowed mother to the safe roadside, away from the danger of the road and human cruelty, like a silent and majestic guardian. The night's chill was no longer just a sensation. It was a sharp bite that seeped into her bones, an icy promise of oblivion. The pain, once a lancing pulse, now spread like dark ink, staining every fiber of the elderly woman's body. She opened her eyes with difficulty, her vision blurred, the world spinning in a whirlwind of distant stars and dancing shadows. The smell of damp earth and dry leaves filled her nostrils, and the rough asphalt was no longer beneath her back. There was a strange softness, an unexpected warmth that enveloped her, a stark contrast to the coldness of abandonment. Slowly, the fog in her mind began to clear, revealing the imposing silhouette hovering over her. It was the tiger. The same white spectre that had emerged from the depths of the forest was now there, inches away, its deep blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was not threatening, but curiously protective. A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of awe-striking disbelief. How was it possible, such a majestic wild predator acting with such gentleness? The memory of the impact returned with brutal clarity. The glare of the headlights, the sound of the engine, the indistinct figure at the wheel. Her daughter, the woman she had loved, raised, and who had now left her for dead on a deserted road. The physical pain was immense, but the wound of betrayal was an even deeper abyss, an icy void that not even the tiger's warmth seemed able to fill. She felt tears stream down her temples, mixing with the dust and dried blood. They were not tears of self-pity, but of bitter incomprehension. How could a daughter's heart become as cold as the metal of the car that ran her over? The tiger, as if sensing her silent agony, moved slightly. Its large, powerful head lowered with calculated slowness, and its snout brushed the elderly woman's injured arm. There was no pressure, just a light touch, almost a caress, that made the woman's skin tingle. It was a gesture that spoke of ancestral wisdom, of a compassion that transcended species barriers. Where humanity had failed, nature extended a paw. She tried to move, but a sharp pain exploded in her leg, making her groan. The tiger recoiled a little, but remained close, its blue eyes like two full moons in the darkness, observing every tremor of her body. The widow, whose name was Ilara, realized she was lying on a bed of dry leaves and moss, carefully arranged. The tiger hadn't just dragged her, it had settled her. It was an improvised but safe refuge, far from the imminent danger of the road and the indifferent eyes of the world. The silence of the forest was broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant sounds of nocturnal life. Ilara felt the weight of solitude, but the tiger's imposing presence was a paradox. She was alone, but not helpless. The wild creature was her only companion, her unexpected guardian. The irony was cruel. Her own flesh and blood had abandoned her, while a predator by nature offered protection. Time seemed to stretch, measured only by the tiger's deep, steady breathing. Ilara closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. She was injured, lost, and her life was in the paws of a wild animal. But strangely, she felt no fear. There was resignation, yes, and a flicker of hope. Perhaps fate had other plans for her, plans that involved the savage purity of an albino tiger. The animal, as if reading her thoughts, let out a low, guttural sound, almost a deep purr that vibrated in the air. It was a comforting sound, a reminder of its constant presence. Ilara opened her eyes again, meeting the tiger's gaze. In those blue eyes she saw not hunger, but an ancient intelligence, a soul that seemed to understand the fragility of life and the cruelty of the human heart. Night advanced, and with it, uncertainty. But, under the silent vigilance of her white guardian, Ilara felt that perhaps her story had not yet reached its end. What dawn would bring for the forgotten woman and her mysterious protector was a secret the forest guarded with the same majestic silence as the tiger. The night deepened, and with it, the cold that had once bitten now seemed to freeze Ilara's very hope. Every breath was an effort, every heartbeat a reminder of her fragile existence. The pain in her leg, a constant lancing pulse, mingled with the burning in her arm and the dull throb in her head. But strangely, the physical pain was almost a relief, a welcome distraction from the deeper wound. Betrayal. She looked at the tiger, whose blue eyes, once two full moons, now seemed like beacons in the darkness, fixed on her with unwavering vigilance. The low, guttural purr emanating from the animal's chest was the only melody amidst the oppressive silence of the forest. It was a sound that, paradoxically, brought comfort and an edge of terror. Comfort for not being alone, terror for the wild nature of her guardian. Ilara tried to move the fingers of her uninjured hand, feeling the stiffness and tingling. With every movement, the pain in her body protested. She was broken both outside and in. The image of her daughter's SUV, a dark silhouette disappearing into the night, was etched in her mind like an indelible scar. The icy smile, the indifference in the eyes of her own flesh and blood. How could a mother be so easily discarded? How could years of love and sacrifice be erased by a moment of calculated cruelty? The irony of the situation was a bitter poison. Humanity, represented by her daughter, had abandoned her to the mercy of death. Nature, personified by a majestic predator, had taken her in. Where was the logic? Where was the justice? Ilara felt a lump in her throat, a mix of anger and despair, but there was no time for self-pity. Survival was the only priority. The tiger, as if sensing the silent storm in her mind, moved again. Its head lowered and its snout brushed Ilara's shoulder. This time, the touch lingered longer, a damp, soft warmth that spread across her skin. It was a gesture of unexpected intimacy, a communication that transcended words. In that moment, Ilara felt a primary connection, a mutual understanding that defied all reason. She slowly extended her hand, her fingers trembling, and touched the tiger's dense, soft fur. It was like touching a cloud, freshly fallen snow, but with the undeniable strength of a predator. The animal did not recoil. Its blue eyes met hers, and Ilara swore she saw a gleam of something deeper, something ancestral and wise. It wasn't just an animal, it was a spirit of the forest, a guardian from a forgotten time. The scent of the forest filled her nostrils, damp earth, pine, decaying leaves, and a faint hint of the tiger's wild smell. The sounds of the night were a strange symphony, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant hoot of an owl, the crackling of branches under the weight of invisible creatures. Each sound was a reminder of her vulnerability, but also of the silent protection that enveloped her. Ilara tried to sit up, but the pain in her leg made her gasp. The tiger let out a low growl, not of threat, but of warning, as if telling her to be careful. It lay down beside her, its massive body forming a barrier against the night wind. The warmth radiating from its fur was a balm for the cold that seeped into her bones. It was a living blanket, a source of warmth and security. Hours dragged on, marked only by the subtle shift of moonlight filtering through the treetops. Ilara dozed and awoke several times, always finding the tiger by her side, its blue eyes always vigilant. In her feverish reveries, she saw her daughter's face, not the cold, indifferent face of now, but the face of a child, laughing. Running through fields, memory was a double-edged sword, bringing both the sweetness of the past and the bitterness of the present. Meanwhile, miles away, the rich woman, Cecilia, drove her impeccable SUV. The bloodstain on the bumper had already been washed away by the fine rain that had briefly fallen. In her mind, the incident was just a minor setback, a conveniently resolved problem. She had planned everything with precision, choosing a deserted road, far from cameras and witnesses. No one would ever know, no one would ever blame her. The inheritance was secured. A smile of satisfaction curved her thin lips. She was free, or so she thought. Back in the forest, Ilara felt a flicker of hope. Dawn was not far. A slight change in the air, a subtle lightening on the eastern horizon, promised the end of darkness. But what would the day bring? Rescue, or just the revelation of her desperate situation under the unforgiving light of the sun? And the tiger? Would it stay, or would it abandon her in daylight, returning to its wild nature? In those deep blue eyes, Ilara sought answers, but found only the promise of an even greater mystery. The tiger, her unexpected guardian, was the bridge between life and death, between human cruelty and savage compassion. Ilara knew her life had changed forever that night. She was no longer the forgotten widow, but the woman who had been saved by a white spectre and who now carried within her the mark of betrayal and the miracle of protection. The world outside might have abandoned her, but there, beneath the canopy of trees, she had found a sanctuary and a guardian with sapphire eyes. The journey was just beginning. Night gave way to a pale twilight, a grey veil stretching lazily over the treetops. The air, once biting, softened slightly, but the morning chill still clung to Ilara's bones, an icy presence reminding her of her fragility. The deep silence of the forest began to break, not with the explosion of daytime noises, but with a gradual symphony of whispers and chirps, the distant call of a solitary bird, the rustling of leaves under invisible creatures' feet, the soft murmur of the wind through the pines. Each sound was a reminder that the world was waking up, but for Ilara, it was merely the transition from a nocturnal nightmare to an equally brutal daytime reality. She opened her heavy, aching eyes, and the first thing she saw was the ethereal gleam of the tiger's fur. Its blue eyes, which in the darkness had seemed like beacons, now reflected the faint light of dawn with an almost supernatural intensity. The animal lay, majestic and still, inches from her, its massive body still radiating a comforting warmth. The predator's proximity, which hours before might have been terrifying, was now the only anchor in her shattered world. The pain in her leg was a constant, a dull, relentless drumming that pulsed in sync with her heart. Her arm throbbed, and her head ached with an intensity that threatened to tear away her consciousness. But beneath the physical pain, the wound of betrayal continued to bleed, a void no bandage or painkiller could heal. Her daughter, Cecilia. The name echoed in her mind, a silent lament. How could a mother's love be so easily discarded, crushed beneath the wheels of a luxury car, in pursuit of an inheritance? The irony was a poison spreading through her veins. Ilara tried to move, but the slightest effort triggered a wave of pain that made her gasp. The tiger, as if sensing her distress, raised its head. A low, deep growl vibrated in its chest, not of threat, but of warning, as if telling her to be careful. Its blue eyes fixed on hers, and Ilara felt a silent communication, an understanding that transcended language barriers. It was as if the tiger said, "Don't move, I'm here." The scent of the forest, which had been an indistinct blend, now became sharper with the light. The earthy aroma of nocturnal dampness, the resinous fragrance of pines, the sweet scent of decaying leaves. And beneath it all, the clean, wild odor of the tiger, a constant reminder of its presence. Ilara felt her throat dry, a burning thirst that bothered her more than hunger. Water. The need was pressing. She looked at the tiger, a mute question in her eyes. The animal, as if answering, rose with surprising grace for its size. Its muscles rippled beneath its white fur, and Ilara felt a shiver. This was a predator, a perfect hunting machine, and however gentle it had been, its wild nature was undeniable. The tiger took a few steps, moving away slightly, but without losing sight of Ilara. It sniffed the air, its whiskers twitching, and then looked at her as if inviting her to follow. But Ilara couldn't move. The pain was excruciating. She shook her head slightly, indicating her inability. The tiger seemed to understand. It let out a deep, almost human sigh and then turned, disappearing silently among the trees. An icy panic gripped Ilara's heart. Was it abandoning her? Had it fulfilled its role as a nocturnal guardian and was now returning to its wild life? The solitude, which had been mitigated by the tiger's presence, returned with full force, a crushing weight. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The sun began to filter through the treetops, creating golden patches on the forest floor. The sounds of the day intensified, but the tiger's absence was a deafening vacuum. Ilara felt tears well up again, not from physical pain, but from profound helplessness. Her daughter had abandoned her, and now, her unexpected guardian too. She was alone, injured, in an unknown forest at the mercy of the elements and other dangers the day might bring. Suddenly, a louder rustling caught her attention. The tiger reappeared, as silently as it had left. In its mouth it carried a thick branch, covered with large, damp leaves, which seemed to have been torn from a creeping plant. With surprising delicacy, it deposited the branch beside Ilara. The leaves were dewy, and small drops of water glistened on their surfaces. It was an offering, a gift. Water. Ilara looked at the tiger, her eyes brimming with gratitude. She extended a trembling hand and took one of the leaves, bringing it to her lips. The water, fresh and pure, was a balm for her parched throat, an immediate relief that made her feel a flicker of hope. The tiger watched her, its blue eyes fixed on her, as if monitoring her reaction. That gesture, so simple and so profound, spoke of an intelligence and a compassion that defied all explanation. Meanwhile, miles away, Cecilia pulled her SUV up to a luxurious country hotel. The morning sun kissed the imposing facade, and life seemed perfect. She stepped out of the car, impeccable in her designer suit, and adjusted her sunglasses. No stain, no witness, no guilt. The inheritance was in her hands, and the future, bright and unhindered, awaited her. She smiled to herself, a cold, calculating smile, completely oblivious to the woman agonizing in the forest and to the white guardian that defied logic. In the forest, Ilara, her thirst assuaged, felt a new strength, a determination to survive. The tiger lay down beside her again, its massive body offering security. The journey was far from over. The forest was a labyrinth of mysteries and dangers. But with her guardian with sapphire eyes, Ilara felt that perhaps, just perhaps, she had a chance. Day had arrived, and with it, the promise of a fight for life, guided by the compassion of a predator and the strength of a betrayed mother. The enigma of the albino tiger and its purpose still hung in the air. But for now, its presence was the only miracle Ilara needed. The water from the leaves, though little, was a balm for Ilara's throat, a reminder that life, however fragile, still pulsed within her. But thirst was just one of many battles. The pain in her leg, now more evident in the pale morning light, was a constant hammer. Her arm throbbed, and her head, with its wound hidden beneath her tangled hair, pulsed with a cruel rhythm. The forest, which had once been a refuge of darkness and mystery, now revealed itself in sharp detail, the dampness clinging to the leaves, the tangle of twisted roots, the glistening spiderweb stretching between two branches. Each detail was a reminder of her vulnerability. The tiger, her guardian with sapphire eyes, lay down beside her again, its massive, warm body offering a security no concrete wall could match. But Ilara knew she couldn't stay there. The night's cold, though lessening, still punished her, and the threat of infection in her wounds was real and pressing. She needed help, shelter, something more than the silent compassion of a predator. Her eyes met the tiger's, a mute question hanging in the air. The animal, as if reading her thoughts, let out a low growl, almost a murmur, and then, with a slow and deliberate movement, stood up. It did not move away. Instead, it positioned itself in front of her, its blue eyes fixed on hers. Then, with its head, it made a subtle movement towards an almost invisible trail that opened through the dense vegetation. It was an invitation, an indication. The tiger was telling her to follow it. Ilara tried to move her injured leg, and a wave of pain made her bite her lip to keep from screaming. It was impossible. She shook her head, tears welling up again, not from despair, but from frustration. She was trapped, a burden to her unexpected guardian. The tiger seemed to understand her inability. It let out a deep, almost human sigh, and then, to Ilara's surprise, it lowered itself, bending its massive body. It looked at her again, and there was an intelligence, a patience in its eyes that made her hesitate. It was as if it was inviting her to lean on it. With a monumental effort, Ilara dragged herself a little, using her arms to propel herself. The pain was excruciating, but the determination to survive, fueled by the image of Cecilia and her betrayal, was stronger. She extended a trembling hand and touched the tiger's soft, dense fur. It was warm, vibrant with life. With the help of the tiger, which remained still and patient, Ilara managed to lean against its flank. The wild scent of the animal enveloped her, an aroma of earth, pine, and something untamed. The tiger began to move, slowly, with surprising delicacy for its size. Each step was an agony for Ilara, but the support of the tiger's body was a pillar of strength. It guided her, almost carrying her through the forest, avoiding the most difficult obstacles, choosing the path of least resistance. It was a strange and painful dance, that of the injured woman and the gentle predator. Meanwhile, miles away, Cecilia's life followed its impeccable course. At the luxurious country hotel, she enjoyed a gourmet breakfast, leafing through a financial newspaper. The morning sun streamed through the panoramic windows, illuminating the exquisite ambiance. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Dr. Almeida, Cecilia here. Yes, everything is planned. Probate can be initiated. No, there's no one else. My mother. She died in an accident, a road fatality. Very sad, yes, but life goes on, doesn't it? The inheritance. Yes, all to me. Perfect." A cold, calculating smile played on her lips. No shadow of remorse, no hesitation. Her voice was soft, but laced with a coldness that would freeze anyone's blood. She was the personification of limitless ambition, of cruelty veiled by elegance. For Cecilia, the world was a chessboard, and she was the queen, moving her pieces with lethal precision. The forest, the deserted road, the run-over mother, all were merely a means to an end. Back in the forest, Ilara and the tiger continued their slow, painful journey. The sun climbed in the sky, filtering through the treetops in golden shafts. The heat began to make itself felt, but the forest's humidity was still palpable. The tiger led her through dense bushes and ancient trees, its blue eyes always vigilant, scanning the environment. Ilara felt overwhelming fatigue, exhaustion seeping into every fiber of her being. But the tiger's presence was a beacon, a promise that she was not alone. Suddenly, the tiger stopped. It let out a low growl, different from the previous ones, more of an alert than a warning. Its muscles tensed beneath its white fur. Ilara, exhausted and confused, tried to look in the direction the tiger was focused. A few meters away, amidst the dense foliage, she glimpsed a metallic glint. It was the sun's reflection on something, and then she heard it. A distant but unmistakable sound, the bark of a dog. And, immediately after, human voices. A mix of relief and panic washed over her. Rescue or a new danger. And the tiger, it was a wild animal. Would the presence of humans frighten him or make him aggressive? The fear that they would see him, hunt him, made her hold her breath. The tiger, as if reading her thoughts, moved its head slightly, its eyes meeting hers for an instant. There was an almost human intelligence in its gaze, a promise of protection, but also a warning. It knew the risk. Its muscles tensed, ready for action. The smell of wet earth and pine emanating from its fur was a constant reminder of its wild nature, but its delicacy with Ilara was a paradox that defied reason. The footsteps grew closer, the rustling of leaves and branches under heavy boots unmistakable. The dog's bark, now an excited whine, indicated it was sniffing something out. Ilara felt her heart pound, a frantic drum in her chest. Was it her scent, or the tiger's? She tried to shrink back even further, wishing the earth would swallow her. The pain in her leg and arm was a constant torment, but the panic that now invaded her was a cold that penetrated to her bones. "Over here, Rex. What have you found, boy?" The voice, deep and with a rustic accent, seemed to come from very close. Ilara could distinguish the sound of branches being pushed aside, the dog's heavy breathing. She closed her eyes, praying they would pass by, that the forest would swallow them again in its silence. The tiger, however, did not move. It remained a solid barrier, its body tense but still. Its blue eyes, however, scanned the foliage with impressive speed. Ilara felt a slight tremor in its fur, a sign of its readiness. Suddenly, the dog's bark intensified, transforming into a low growl, almost a warning snarl. "What is it, Rex? Is it a deer? A wild boar?" The voice was a few meters away. Ilara could hear the sound of a rifle being cocked. Panic turned into pure terror. They were armed, and the dog had sensed the tiger's presence. The tiger reacted, not with a furious attack, but with a cunning that surprised Ilara. It let out a deep, guttural growl, but not directed at the men. It was a sound that seemed to come from its very depths, a primal warning that made the air vibrate. The dog, once so brave, let out a frightened yelp and recoiled, its bark transforming into a whine of fear. "What the hell was that?" The man's voice was now laced with apprehension. "It sounded like a big animal. Rex, get back here!" The tiger then moved with surprising speed for its size. It didn't run, but slid through the foliage, gently nudging Ilara with its snout, so she would move in the same direction, away from the men. It was a calculated move, a diversion. It didn't want confrontation, but it also didn't want to be discovered. Ilara, despite the excruciating pain, dragged herself, propelled by survival instinct and the tiger's silent guidance. Every movement was an agony, but the adrenaline kept her alert. She could hear the men approaching the spot where they had been hiding, their voices confused and somewhat frightened. "I don't see anything, João," said a second voice. "But Rex is terrified. I've never seen him like this." "Whatever it is, it's big. And it's not a bear. Bears don't growl like that." As Ilara and the tiger slowly moved away, miles distant, Cecilia raised a crystal champagne flute. The morning sun bathed the balcony of her presidential suite at the country hotel, and the panoramic view of the verdant landscape was the personification of tranquility. She had just finished a call with her lawyer, confirming the initiation of the probate process. "To freedom," she murmured, her lips curving into an icy smile. "To an unfettered future." She took a sip, the champagne's effervescence echoing the exuberance of her new life. No shadow of doubt, no pang of remorse. The image of her mother, fallen on the road, was merely a distant memory, an obstacle overcome. She was the queen of her own chessboard, and checkmate had been delivered. Back in the forest, the tiger continued to guide Ilara, its steps silent and precise, leading them further and further from the imminent danger of the men. The tiger's growl had been enough to scare off the dog and sow doubt in the hunters, buying precious time. But the forest was vast and unpredictable. What else awaited them? The tiger, her guardian with sapphire eyes, continued to be Ilara's only link to hope, a white enigma amidst the dense green, whose purpose still unfolded with each painful step. The journey was far from over, and every shadow, every sound, was a promise of a new challenge. The guttural growl of the tiger, a primal vibration that seemed to tear the very fabric of the air, reverberated not only through the forest, but also in Ilara's chest. It was not a sound of attack, but of an ancestral authority, a warning that made the dog yelp in fear and recoil, and the men hesitate. The tiger did not wait. With surprising agility for its size, it slid through the foliage, gently nudging Ilara with its snout, a silent command for her to follow. Every movement was a torture for Ilara, her injured leg protesting with each drag, her arm throbbing with a lancing pain. But panic, more than pain, propelled her. The fear of being found, of being seen with the tiger, of the miracle of her survival being destroyed by human ignorance, was a relentless engine. She could hear the men's voices fading, confused and frightened. "What the hell was that, João?" "I don't know, but Rex has never been like that. It sounded like a monster." The sound of heavy footsteps mingled with the rustling of leaves, indicating that for now the threat had been averted. The tiger, however, did not relax. Its blue eyes continued to scan the environment, its muscles tense beneath its snow-white fur. It guided her along a steeper path, through a tangle of roots and vines, a green labyrinth that seemed to close in behind them with every step. The forest, once a refuge, was now a hiding place, every shadow a potential threat. Ilara, exhausted, felt the damp earth beneath her hands, the smell of moss and decaying leaves filling her nostrils. Pain was a constant companion, but the tiger's presence was a strange balm. It was a walking paradox, a wild predator protecting her with an almost human tenderness. Who was it? Why was it helping her? These questions swirled in her mind, but there was no time for answers. Survival was the only priority. Meanwhile, miles away, in a world of crystal and steel, Cecilia toasted her future. The champagne flute, now empty, rested on the marble table. She was on the phone, her voice soft and controlled, dictating instructions to an assistant. "Yes, I want all assets catalogued. And make sure the country house is prepared for sale. There's no need for sentimentalism. My mother, she always preferred the city anyway." A cold smile played on her lips. The image of Ilara, fallen on the road, was a distant stain, easily erased by the promise of an unfettered life, free from the expectations and shadows of the past. She was the architect of her own destiny, and every piece on the chessboard was fitting perfectly. The inheritance, the freedom, the power, everything was within her grasp. Back in the forest, the tiger stopped abruptly. It let out a low growl, but this time it was not an alert, but a strange melancholy. Its blue eyes, once so focused on escape, now turned to a clearing ahead. Ilara, with the tiger's help, managed to lean against a tree and look. The clearing was different from anything they had seen so far. The ground was covered with soft, luminous grass, and in the center, a centuries-old oak stood majestic, its twisted roots forming a natural throne. But what really caught her attention were the flowers, flowers of a vibrant, almost electric blue that shone with their own light, covering the ground like a starry carpet. She had never seen such flowers. The tiger moved into the clearing, its steps now slower, almost reverent. It lay down near the oak, its eyes fixed on the blue flowers. There was something sacred in that place, a palpable energy that calmed Ilara's pain and silenced her fears. She dragged herself to the oak, feeling the rough texture of the bark under her hands. The blue flowers seemed to pulse, and a sweet, earthy aroma filled the air. It was a refuge, a sanctuary amidst the chaos. But the peace was illusory. The tiger, which seemed to have found a moment of rest, suddenly raised its head. Its blue eyes widened, and a tremor ran through its body. It did not growl, did not move to protect. Instead, it let out a sound Ilara had never heard before, a low, deep lament, almost a sob. Its eyes were fixed on something beyond the clearing, something Ilara could not see. And then she heard it. It wasn't the barking of dogs, nor the voices of hunters. It was a different sound, more distant but unmistakable, the hum of an engine, a vehicle approaching. But it wasn't the sound of a car on the main road. It was the sound of an off-road vehicle, cutting through the dense forest vegetation, coming from an unexpected direction. The tiger, her guardian with sapphire eyes, seemed paralyzed, its lament echoing in the clearing. The sanctuary's peace was shattered. What or who was coming now? And why did the tiger, who had protected her with such ferocity, seem so vulnerable? The journey, far from finding a safe harbor, had just plunged into a new and deeper mystery. The tension mounted, the engine's hum growing in intensity. The tiger, once the personification of strength and protection, now seemed like a wounded creature, its blue eyes reflecting a deep pain. Ilara, despite her own exhaustion and pain, felt a wave of apprehension for it. What could scare such a magnificent predator? What did that sound mean? The forest, with its secrets and dangers, was far from revealing all its mysteries. The tiger's lament, a sound so profoundly sad and ancient, cut through the growing hum of the approaching engine. Ilara, leaning heavily against the rough trunk of the centuries-old oak, felt a shiver that did not come from the forest's cold. That magnificent creature, her silent guardian, now trembled, not with the fury of a predator, but with a palpable despair. Its sapphire eyes, usually so sharp and resolute, were wide, reflecting an ancient fear, fixed on something beyond the blue flowers that glistened on the ground. The hum intensified, transforming into a metallic roar that tore through the sacred silence of the clearing. Branches snapped, leaves were crushed under heavy tires. It was an intrusive, violent sound that desecrated the peace of that natural sanctuary. Ilara tried to move, but the lancing pain in her leg and the constant throbbing in her arm paralyzed her. She looked at the tiger, expecting a reaction, an escape plan, but it remained there, prostrate, its body vibrating with the continuous lament. It was not a frightened predator, but a soul in agony, a creature that seemed to know and accept its fate. Suddenly, the engine fell silent, abruptly, a few meters from the clearing. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. Ilara held her breath, her heart beating wildly against her ribs, a frantic drum in her chest. She shrank back, trying to merge with the rough bark of the oak, her eyes fixed on the edge of the clearing. The tiger, in turn, raised its head, its blue eyes now watery, a strange gleam in them, almost of recognition, of a familiar pain. Then they emerged. They were not ordinary hunters. They were two men dressed in camouflaged uniforms, but not military. Their clothes were of a durable fabric, with pockets and high-tech looking equipment. One carried a tranquilizer dart rifle, the other a containment net. Their faces were serious, determined, devoid of the curiosity or fear of the previous hunters. They weren't there by chance. They were looking for something, or someone. Their gaze swept the clearing and then stopped at the tiger. There was no surprise, just a cold, professional confirmation. "We found him," said the first man, his voice low and controlled, devoid of any emotion. "The white specimen, exactly as described." The tiger, hearing those words, let out a faint growl, almost imperceptible, but carrying immense pain. It did not rise to attack, did not prepare for defense. Instead, it shrank back even further, its blue eyes fixed on the men, but with a resignation that broke Ilara's heart. It was being hunted, and not for its skin, but for its uniqueness, for its very existence. Ilara felt an icy terror. They weren't there to hurt her, but to capture the tiger, her guardian, the only being who had protected and cared for her with an unexplained tenderness. She needed to do something, but what? She was injured, weak, and those men seemed prepared for any eventuality, for any resistance. While the scene unfolded in the clearing miles away, in a world of crystal and steel, Cecilia watched the sunset from her balcony. The champagne flute had been replaced by an aged whiskey, and the smile on her lips was wider, more satisfied. She was reviewing documents on her tablet, the numbers of her new fortune dancing before her eyes. "Perfect," she murmured, sliding her finger across the screen, everything fitting into place. The image of her mother, the old woman who had always suffocated her with her expectations and judgments, was now a distant, irrelevant shadow. She had won. Freedom was hers. And the world, with all its possibilities, was at her feet, waiting to be conquered. Back in the clearing, the men began to move, slowly with calculated movements, encircling the tiger. The dart rifle was ready, aimed. The net, unfurled, awaited the right moment. The tiger, in a last act of silent despair, looked at Ilara. Its blue eyes met hers, and in them Ilara saw not only pain, but a silent plea, a farewell, an imminent sacrifice. It knew what was coming, and somehow it was surrendering. "No!" Ilara tried to scream, but her voice came out as a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way, the pain pinning her to the ground. Despair invaded her, an icy, paralyzing wave. She could not allow them to take her guardian, not after all he had done for her. One of the men raised the rifle, aiming at the tiger's flank. The other prepared the net, ready to throw. The air in the clearing grew dense, heavy with an unbearable tension, an omen of tragedy. The blue flowers, once so vibrant, seemed to wilt under the weight of the impending catastrophe. The tiger closed its eyes, accepting its fate. But Ilara did not. A primal force, born of despair and gratitude, propelled her. She didn't know what she would do, but she wouldn't stand by. The guardian would not be taken without a fight. The forest, silent witness to so many lives and deaths, was about to witness another clash, one that would define the fate of an injured woman and her enigmatic protector. The hum of the engine had ceased, but the real danger had just begun. Ilara felt the ground beneath her rough hands, the smell of earth and blood mixed with the sweet aroma of the flowers. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest against immobility, against helplessness. With a superhuman effort, She pushed against the oak trunk, the bark scratching her skin, the pain in her leg exploding in 1,000 needles. But she did not yield. The tiger's gaze, that silent plea, was a fire in her soul. She could not fail him, not now. She dragged herself, inch by inch, towards the tiger and the approaching men. Her body was a heavy burden, but her will was steel. "Stop!" Her voice, though still hoarse, gained a desperate intensity. The men, who were a few steps from the tiger, hesitated for an instant, surprised by the presence of the injured woman who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Their eyes, once focused only on the target, now shifted to Ilara. It was enough, that brief moment of distraction. The man with the dart rifle, who had already begun the motion to fire, froze. The other with the net looked at his partner, awaiting an order. The tiger, which had closed its eyes in resignation, opened them again. Its blue eyes, once watery with pain, now reflected a flicker of hope, of a new determination. It saw Ilara, the woman it had protected, now dragging herself, injured, to protect it. A low, guttural growl, different from the previous lament, escaped its throat. It was not a growl of fear, but of alert, of a contained fury that began to simmer. The guardian was awakening from its stupor. The men, noticing the change in the animal's posture, turned their attention back to it, but the crucial moment had passed. The first man, recovering from the shock, raised the rifle again, aiming with precision. "Stay still, madam. Don't interfere." His voice was cold, but there was an urgency in it. Ilara ignored him. She lunged forward not to attack, but to create a barrier, a human obstacle between the rifle and the tiger. Her wounded, fragile body was all she had. The man fired. The dart hissed through the air. Ilara felt a sharp sting in her shoulder, a pain that added to the others but did not stop her. She had moved enough to deflect the shot. The dart did not hit the tiger's flank, but the upper part of its hind paw, a superficial wound that made it roar in pain and surprise. The tranquilizer's effect would be slower, less potent. The tiger, now furious and with the pain of the dart, was no longer resigned. It stood up, staggering for an instant, and then let out a powerful roar that echoed through the forest, a sound that made the birds scatter in panic and the men recoil a step. Its blue eyes, once full of sadness, now burned with a protective fury, fixed on the invaders. It was wounded, but not defeated. The second man, seeing the opportunity, threw the net. But the tiger, driven by pain and the sight of Ilara wounded because of him, was faster. It leaped with surprising agility for a wounded animal, and the net fell to the ground, empty, a few meters from where it stood. The clearing erupted in chaos. The tiger, now standing, despite its injured paw, was ready to fight. It was no longer accepting its fate. Ilara, fallen to the ground, her shoulder throbbing, felt a wave of relief and dread. She had succeeded. She had given the tiger a chance, but at what cost? The men, now at a disadvantage, realized the situation had drastically changed. The albino tiger, the white specimen, was no longer the resigned animal they expected. It was a wounded predator, yes, but also a furious guardian, driven by a newfound loyalty. The first man tried to reload the rifle, but the tiger advanced, not against them, but in a flanking movement, encircling Ilara, positioning itself between her and the hunters. Its blue eyes, glowing in the forest's gloom, were a promise of violence to anyone who dared approach. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with menace. The men, however professional they were, did not expect such resistance, nor Ilara's unexpected intervention. They had underestimated the connection between the woman and the animal. The forest, which had once seemed a refuge, was now a battlefield. And Ilara, the woman who had lost everything, was willing to lose even more to protect the only being who had shown her true kindness. The fate of the tiger and hers was hanging by a thread, between the guardian's fury and the relentless determination of its hunters. The albino tiger's roar, a primordial sound that tore the veil of the nascent night, was not just a cry of pain, but a declaration of war. It echoed through the trees, making the leaves tremble and the already frightened birds scatter in a chaotic flurry. There was no more resignation in its blue eyes, only a savage, protective fury. It stood imposing despite its injured hind paw between Elara and the two men, its massive body forming an insurmountable barrier. Elara, prostrate on the ground, felt the vibration of the roar in her own chest. Her shoulder throbbed, her leg burned, but a wave of adrenaline coursed through her, mingling with dread and an overwhelming gratitude. The tiger was fighting for her. Her guardian, wounded, was risking everything. She could not be a dead weight, not now. The hunters, for their part, were not men to be easily intimidated. The initial shock gave way to a renewed determination. The first man, who carried the dart rifle, took a step back, his expression tense. He knew that a wounded tiger was infinitely more dangerous than a cornered animal. The second, with the net, maintained a defensive posture, his eyes fixed on the feline's movements. "He's agitated," the first one said, his voice low and controlled, but with a tone of urgency. "The tranquilizer won't take immediate effect. We need another dart." The tiger did not wait. With a guttural growl, it advanced a step, not in a full charge, but in a clear warning. Its blue eyes, almost luminous in the gloom, were a focus of menace. It was protecting its territory, and Elara was part of it. Elara, sensing the urgency of the situation, tried to move again. The pain was excruciating, but she needed to do something. Anything. She looked around, her eyes sweeping the ground in search of something, anything that could serve as a distraction or a weapon. Her fingers found a sharp, chipped stone, and she gripped it, the roughness of the rock contrasting with the softness of her skin. It was useless against armed men, but it was something. It was a declaration that she would not give up. The man with the rifle, with a quick and calculated movement, tried to reload, but the tiger was fast, even with its injured paw. It leaped, not at the man, but in a sideways movement, forcing him to swerve and lose his balance for an instant. The dart cartridge fell to the ground, rolling away. "Damn it!" the man hissed, frustrated. The other hunter, seeing the opportunity, tried to throw the net again, aiming for the tiger's injured paw. But Elara, with a hoarse cry of effort, threw the stone she held. It wasn't a strong throw, but it was enough to hit the man's arm, deflecting his aim. The net opened in the air, but fell harmlessly a few meters from the tiger. The clearing transformed into a stage of combat. The tiger, now with the advantage of having partially disarmed one of the hunters, did not hesitate. It growled, teeth bared, and advanced, not to kill, but to drive them away, to intimidate. Its injured paw made it limp slightly, but its ferocity was unshakable. The men, now without the reloaded dart rifle and with the net out of reach, were in a precarious position. They drew retractable batons from their belts, stun weapons that emitted an electric hum. They didn't want to kill the specimen, but to contain it. The tiger, sensing the new threat, recoiled a step, its eyes fixed on the batons. It had felt the dart's pain, but the electric shock would be different, more incapacitating. It couldn't afford to be hit. Meanwhile, miles away in her world of luxury and indifference, Cecilia slid her finger across her tablet screen, a satisfied smile on her lips. The numbers of her new fortune danced before her eyes, each zero a confirmation of her newly acquired freedom. The aged whiskey warmed her throat, and the view of the sunset over the city was a perfect backdrop for her victory. "Everything fits," she murmured, her voice thick with satisfaction. "The old woman was just an obstacle. Now the path is clear." She didn't think of the forest, nor the mother she had run over, nor the tiger that had dragged her to safety. Her mind was on contracts, on investments, on an unfettered future. Back in the clearing, the situation was becoming desperate. The men with the stun batons began to encircle the tiger again, their movements more cautious but determined. The electric hum filled the air, a sinister sound that promised pain and paralysis. The tiger, caught between fury and pain, knew it couldn't fight the batons for long. It looked at Ilara, and in that gaze, she saw not only the determination to protect her, but also a flicker of despair, of a fight it might not be able to win alone. But then, something changed. A distant sound, almost inaudible at first, began to make itself present. A howl. Not the tiger's howl, but a different sound. Sharper, wilder, a howl that seemed to come from deep within the forest, answering the albino tiger's roar of pain and fury. The hunters paused for an instant, their eyes sweeping the shadows of the trees. The howl repeated, closer this time, and it was not alone. Other howls joined, forming a spectral chorus that echoed through the night. Wolves. A pack of wolves. The albino tiger, which was about to launch a desperate attack, froze. Its blue eyes widened, not from fear, but from surprise and an almost primal recognition. It turned its head slightly, listening to the approaching howls. The tension in the clearing shifted, from a confrontation between man and beast to something more complex, more primal. The forest, which had once been a silent witness, now seemed to awaken with a primal omen. The howls, once distant, became a guttural chorus, filling the air with a promise of savagery. It was not the tiger's roar, but something older, more ancestral, that made the hairs on the hunter's neck stand on end. Wolves! The word escaped one of the men's lips, a whisper laden with fear and disbelief. The electric hum of the stun batons, once a sound of control, now seemed a faint lament before the brute force that approached. They had come for a tiger, a valuable specimen, but not for a war against an entire pack. The albino tiger, its body tense with pain and fury, froze. Its blue eyes, which moments before burned with a warrior's determination, now widened with a mixture of surprise and an almost primal recognition. It turned its head slightly, not towards the hunters, but towards the shadows dancing at the edge of the clearing. The howls intensified, closer, more menacing, and they were not alone. The rustling of leaves and the crackling of dry branches announced their imminent arrival. Ilara, on the verge of unconsciousness, felt a new wave of panic. Her clouded eyes could barely focus, but the sound of the howls pierced the fog of pain. Were they more predators, more danger? Her exhausted mind couldn't process the new threat, only registered the escalation of terror. She clung to the tiger's body, an anchor in her crumbling world. The hunters, once so confident in their technology and numbers, were now at a disadvantage. Their faces, once hardened by determination, now displayed a pale terror. A pack of hungry wolves was a complication not in their plans. They had come to capture, not to fight for their lives against multiple predators. "Retreat! Retreat!" the leader shouted, his voice choked with panic. "We can't be surrounded!" But it was too late. From the shadows of the forest they emerged. First, a large wolf with dark grey fur, yellow eyes gleaming with intelligence and hunger. Behind it, 5, perhaps 6 more lean, muscular silhouettes moving with lethal grace. They did not attack immediately. They stopped at the edge, sniffing the air, their gazes fixed on the humans, on the tiger, on the scene of conflict. The tension in the clearing shifted from a confrontation between man and beast to something more complex, more primal. The albino tiger let out a low growl, not of defiance to the wolves, but a warning, a declaration of its presence. It was a sound that seemed to be understood by the newcomers. The wolves did not advance on the tiger. Their eyes, instead, fixed on the hunters, who now formed a precarious defensive circle, their stun batons pointed in all directions. The pack leader, with a deeper growl, took a step forward. It was a challenge, a claim of territory, or perhaps just the perception of an opportunity. The scent of human adrenaline and fear was an irresistible invitation. Maintain formation. Do not engage the wolves unless attacked. The headhunter tried to impose order, but panic was already setting in. One of the men, the one who had been hit by the dart, stumbled backward, his eyes wide. It was enough. The lead wolf, with surprising speed, lunged at the faltering hunter. It was not an attack to kill, but to test, to destabilize. The man screamed, his stun baton falling from his hands as he tried to defend himself. The other wolves, seeing the opening, began to move, not in a coordinated attack, but in an instinctive encirclement, using the trees and shadows as cover. Chaos erupted. The hunters, divided between the wounded tiger and the pack of wolves, didn't know which way to turn. The electric hum of the stun batons was now ineffective against the agility and numbers of the wolves. Screams of panic mingled with the growls and howls of the animals. The albino tiger, perceiving the distraction and disorganization of the hunters, saw its chance. It did not attack the wolves nor the hunters. Instead, with a monumental effort, it turned, using its body to shield Ilara. Its blue eyes met hers for an instant, a flicker of determination. It would not fight the pack, but would use the confusion to escape. With a low, urgent growl, the tiger began to move, dragging Ilara with the same protective delicacy as before, but now with renewed speed, taking advantage of the hunter's confusion. It headed for the densest part of the forest, where the shadows were deeper and the chance of being followed was smaller. The wolves, focused on the hunters, did not seem to care about the escape of the tiger and its burden. For them, the humans were the most immediate and vulnerable prey. As the hunters fought desperately to repel the wolves, their screams echoing through the night, the albino tiger and Ilara disappeared into the shadows. The forest, which had been a stage of despair, now became a labyrinth of escape. Far away, in her world of glass and concrete, Cecilia answered a call on her tablet. Yes, the deal is sealed. No loose ends. She smiled, a cold, calculating smile, as the view of the illuminated city stretched out beneath her. A sip of whiskey, a sigh of satisfaction. The forest, her mother, the tiger, all of it was a distant, irrelevant echo to her new reality of freedom and fortune. She had no idea that at that very moment her mother's life was being saved by a wild beast. Amidst a battle she could never conceive, the fate of Ilara and her guardian, which seemed sealed, had just gained a new and unpredictable chapter, and the forest, which had once been a silent witness, now seemed to be awakening, and its wild inhabitants were ready to intervene. The escape had begun, but the danger was far from over. The forest swallowed them, transforming the distant screams of the hunters and the wild howls of the wolves into increasingly faint echoes. The albino tiger, its wounded paw dragging heavily, moved with desperate urgency. Each step was a silent agony, but the determination in its blue eyes, now beacons in the growing darkness, was unshakable. It did not run, for Ilara, inert in its gentle drag, would not endure it. Instead, it slid through the shadows, a white phantom among the dark trees, using the density of the vegetation as a shield. Ilara, on the verge of unconsciousness, felt the world spin in a whirlwind of pain and fragmented sensations. The damp smell of earth and decaying leaves filled her nostrils. The tiger's body, warm and muscular, was her only connection to reality, an anchor pulling her through the dark labyrinth. She felt the rhythmic sway, the soft friction of her clothing against its soft fur, and the warmth radiating from the animal, an unexpected comfort amidst the terror. Her heavy eyes opened and closed, glimpsing only blurs of green and black, dappled by the pale moonlight that barely penetrated the treetops. The pain in her leg was a constant fire, but the tiger's presence, its deep, steady breathing, was a strange balm for her terrified soul. She did not know where they were going or if they would survive, but there was a primal trust in the creature that protected her. The tiger, in turn, was in its purest essence, The instinct of survival and protection pulsed in every fiber of its being. Its injured paw throbbed, but it ignored the pain, focusing on every sound, every smell, every movement in the forest. It sought a refuge, a place where they could be safe, away from the men and their fury. Its ears twitched, catching the rustle of a squirrel, the distant hoot of an owl, the murmur of a nearby stream. The forest was its home, and it knew its deepest secrets. It remembered a small cave, hidden behind a waterfall, a place it used to shelter in storms. It was there that it headed, with instinctive precision. The battle between the hunters and the pack of wolves, now a distant lament, served as a smokescreen for their escape. The men, caught by surprise and outnumbered, were fighting for their own lives, with no time to pursue the tiger and its burden. Cries of pain and desperate orders could still be heard, but they diminished with every meter the tiger advanced. The forest, which had once seemed to hold its breath, now seemed to conspire in their favor, its shadows deepening, its trails becoming more intricate. After what seemed an eternity, the tiger stopped. Ilara felt the movement cease, and a different silence enveloped her. It was not the silence of pursuit, but a denser, more protective silence. The tiger deposited her with the same delicacy as always, not dropping her, but gently sliding her onto the moss-covered ground. She opened her eyes, struggling to focus. They were in a small, rocky recess, partially hidden by a curtain of vines and ferns. The air there was damp and cool, and the soft sound of running water could be heard nearby. It was a sanctuary. The tiger lay down beside her, its large, warm body forming a barrier against the night's cold. It let out a deep sigh, and Ilara felt its warm breath on her face. Its blue eyes, now softer, fixed on her, an almost human concern in them. It licked her hand, a rough gesture, yet laden with unexpected tenderness. Ilara's pain was excruciating, but the tiger's presence, its unwavering protection, kept her on the brink of the abyss of unconsciousness. She needed help, a doctor, a hospital. But there, in the heart of the forest, her only hope was the beast that guarded her. Far away in her luxury apartment, Cecilia finished signing the last documents. The gold pen glided smoothly over the paper, sealing her destiny, her fortune. She raised her whiskey glass, toasting the view of the city that stretched out beneath her, a carpet of indifferent lights. "Finally free," she murmured, a satisfied smile on her lips. The image of her mother, the old woman she had run over, did not cross her mind. The forest, the tiger, the battle for survival, all of it was a distant universe, irrelevant to her new reality. She had no idea that at that very moment her mother's life hung by a thread, and that the only thing keeping her alive was the primal instinct of a wild creature. Back in the hidden sanctuary, the albino tiger watched Ilara. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale and sweaty. It knew that the immediate danger had passed, but a new kind of threat hung over them. The wound, the weakness, the solitude. The tiger let out a low growl, almost a lament. It stood up, limping slightly, and began to sniff the air, its eyes scanning the darkness of the cave. There was something else it could do. There was a scent, a trail, a memory. It turned to Ilara, its blue eyes gleaming with a new determination. The escape had been only the beginning. The true fight for Ilara's life was about to take an even more unexpected turn. The albino tiger, with a low growl that was more an internal murmur than an audible sound, began to explore the small cave. Its keen senses, honed by a lifetime in the wild, sought something beyond immediate safety. Its nose twitched, sniffing the damp air, the earthy scent of the grotto, the metallic tang of Ilara's blood. But there was another aroma, faint but persistent, a memory woven into the very fabric of that hidden place. It was the smell of a specific herb known by the creatures of the forest for its healing properties. Not a panacea, but a balm. a relief. It moved with a deliberate slowness, its injured paw still a burden but its focus unwavering. Ilara, observing it through half-closed eyes, felt a flicker of something akin to hope. That creature, that magnificent beast, was not just her protector, it was her guardian, her only link to survival in that hostile wilderness. Her body screamed in protest, every nerve ending on fire, but her mind clung to the image of the tiger, a white beacon in her darkening world. The tiger found what it was looking for. Hidden in a damp crevice, partially obscured by a cluster of ferns, grew a small patch of plants with broad, dark green leaves and tiny, almost invisible flowers. It recognized them instantly. Its mother had used them. Its ancestors had used them. It was knowledge passed down through generations, an instinctive wisdom of the forest. With its powerful jaws, it carefully plucked several leaves, avoiding the roots. It brought them back to Ilara, placing them gently beside her. Then, with surprising delicacy, it began to chew them, transforming them into a paste. Ilara watched, fascinated and terrified. What was it doing? Was this a new kind of threat or a desperate attempt at help? The tiger nudged the paste towards her with its nose. Ilara recoiled slightly. It looked unpleasant, earthy and strange. But the tiger's eyes, those piercing blue depths, contained a silent command, an undeniable plea. Trust me. Hesitantly, Ilara extended a trembling hand. The pain was so intense that any potential relief, however unconventional, was worth the risk. She took a small amount of the paste and, with a grimace, put it on her tongue. The taste was bitter, herbaceous, with an underlying earthy tang. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't poisonous. A strange warmth began to spread from her mouth, a subtle sensation of numbness that was almost imperceptible at first, but which slowly, steadily began to diminish the intense pain in her leg. The tiger watched her reaction intently. When it saw the slight relaxation in her features, a soft purr emanated from its chest. It then took more of the chewed leaves and, with its rough tongue, began to apply the paste directly to Ilara's injured leg. The contact was surprising, the sensation of its tongue against her skin, strange and strangely comforting. The bitterness of the herb, combined with the tiger's saliva, created a cool, tingling sensation that seemed to suck the fire from her wound. Ilara gasped, not from pain, but from the pure unexpectedness. She wanted to pull away, but something held her. The tiger wasn't hurting her, it was healing her. That wild beast which could have devoured her was tending to her with a tenderness that defied all logic. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of pain, fear, and an overwhelming wave of gratitude. It continued its work, meticulously covering the laceration with the herbal paste. Once satisfied, it licked the area around the wound to clean it, then settled beside her, its large, warm body once again a protective barrier. The numbing effect of the herb was growing stronger, and Ilara felt the tension in her muscles begin to ease. She still felt pain, but now it was a dull throb, manageable rather than an unbearable agony. The silence of the cave was broken only by the soft drip of water and the rhythmic breathing of the tiger. Ilara closed her eyes, allowing the strange comfort to envelop her. She was safe for now. But the thought of the hunters, of Cecilia, of the world outside that hidden sanctuary, still gnawed at her. Far away, in her world of glass and steel, Cecilia raised her crystal glass. The amber whiskey gleamed beneath the penthouse lights, reflecting the city that stretched endlessly below her. A triumphant smile curved her lips, as sharp and cold as the ice in her drink. "Freedom tastes delicious," she murmured to the void, to the lights that didn't answer, to the fortune that was now unquestionably hers. The deal was sealed, the lawyers had done their work, and the shadow of her mother, the old life, the guilt, all of it had been neatly swept under the rug. She felt no remorse, only a slight irritation at the inconvenience it had all caused. Her mother was a distant past, a stain on her new and bright future. She could not imagine Ilara, her mother, lying in a damp cave, her leg lacerated, being tended to by an albino tiger. The idea would be as absurd to Cecilia as the very existence of an albino tiger in the forest of her childhood. Her world was one of financial transactions, of power and control, of polished surfaces and convenient truths, wild nature, raw pain, the dependence on a beast to survive. That was something that belonged in a documentary, not in her reality. She dialed a number, her voice soft and confident. Yes, everything is ready for the trip. The private jet will be ready at dawn. I want to be as far away from here as possible before anything gets complicated. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. No loose ends, right? No one can trace anything. The response from the other end of the line was reassuring. Cecilia hung up, feeling a wave of power. She had won. The forest, her mother, the past. All of it was a closed chapter. Back in the damp darkness of the cave, Ilara's breathing became more regular. The tiger's balm's effect was undeniable. The pain, though still present, had receded into the background, allowing her a moment of respite. She watched the tiger, which was now lying down, its heavy head on its paws, its blue eyes still fixed on her, a constant vigil. But the truce was fragile. The forest, though now silent, still held dangers. The smell of blood, even if attenuated by moss and dampness, could attract other predators. Ilara's wound, even treated, was severe. Fever could set in, and the hunters. They would not give up so easily. They had lost their prey, and the humiliation, the loss of equipment, perhaps even a man, would make them even more relentless. The tiger, with its keen hearing, sensed something. A distant rustling, different from the wind or the small forest animals. A sound that shouldn't be there. Its ears twitched, catching the subtle vibration of the ground. It raised its head, its blue eyes narrowed. Ilara felt the change in the tiger's posture. The calm that had settled was replaced by a renewed tension. She tried to sit up, but the pain overwhelmed her. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. The tiger did not respond with a sound, but with a movement. It stood up, limping slightly, and positioned itself at the cave entrance, its massive body blocking the opening. Its eyes, now more intense than ever, scanned the darkness outside. It was a guardian, and the threat, though invisible to Ilara, was palpable to it. The rustling became more distinct, accompanied by a muffled sound of footsteps. They were not the heavy, disordered steps of a large animal, but something more, calculated, more human. The hunters. They had regrouped and were now on their trail. The escape had been only the beginning, and the sanctuary, which seemed so safe, was about to be invaded. The tiger let out a low, guttural growl, a warning, a declaration that it would not back down. The true battle for Ilara's life, and perhaps its own, was about to begin again. And this time there were no wolves to distract the pursuers. The forest, which had offered refuge, now prepared to be the stage for a final confrontation. The tiger's growl, low and guttural, vibrated in the damp air of the cave, a warning that extended beyond the stone walls, a challenge to anyone who dared approach. For Ilara, lying on the cold ground, every fiber of her being responded to that primal tension. The pain in her leg, though attenuated by the bitter balm, was still a constant presence, a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. She tried to move, but a moan escaped her lips. Her eyes, fixed on the massive silhouette of the tiger at the cave entrance, pleaded for answers it could not give in words. The sounds outside grew sharper. It was no longer the indistinct rustling, but the cracking of branches under heavy boots, the muffled whisper of male voices. The hunters, they had not given up. The humiliation of the previous night, the loss of their prey, and perhaps even one of their men, had only fueled their fury. They were relentless, and now the scent of fresh blood, however faint, guided them like a macabre beacon. The tiger moved with a tense grace, its injured paw barely bothering it now, adrenaline pulsing through its veins. Its blue eyes, once a well of calm, burned with a contained ferocity. It was the last line of defense, the solitary guardian against the tide of human violence that approached. Ilara watched, her heart beating like an uncontrolled drum. She had spent her life fleeing problems, responsibilities herself. Now trapped, injured, she was about to face the final confrontation, not by her own strength, but by the unwavering loyalty of a wild beast. The voices drew closer, becoming clearer, more menacing. "It's here! The scent is strong," someone muttered, his voice hoarse and full of anticipation. Another replied, "And the tiger. It can't have gone far with that paw. We'll get them." The sound of metal scraping against stone echoed, and Ilara knew they were armed, not with arrows or spears, but with firearms, instruments of death that could bring down even the most majestic of beasts. The tiger let out a louder growl, an unmistakable warning. It was ready. It would not back down. Its posture was pure defiance, an indomitable spirit that refused to be subjugated. Ilara felt a wave of despair, but also a strange admiration. That creature, which she had feared, was now her only hope, her only family in that hostile world. Suddenly, a torch was lit, its flickering light casting dancing shadows at the cave entrance. The tiger's eyes gleamed with a golden reflection, but it did not waver. A burly man, rifle in hand, appeared in the opening, his face marked by rage and determination. He saw the tiger, and for an instant, a flicker of fear crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by an even greater fury. "There he is, and the woman! Don't move!" The tiger did not wait. With a roar that made the cave tremble, it lunged out, not towards the man with the torch, but to the side, into the darkness of the forest. It was a diversionary tactic, a calculated move to draw attention away, to create an opening. The hunters, caught by surprise, shouted and fired. The gunshots echoed through the forest, deafening, brutal. Ilara, paralyzed by shock and pain, saw the tiger disappear into the darkness, drawing the hunters away from the cave. He was sacrificing himself, buying time for her. Hot tears streamed down her face, a mixture of gratitude and despair. She could not stay there. She needed to follow, needed to try. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Ilara dragged herself to the cave entrance. The smell of gunpowder and wet earth filled her nostrils. The hunter's shouts and the tiger's roars faded, growing more distant, deeper into the forest. She knew she had to go in the opposite direction. Every movement was an agony, but the image of the tiger, her white guardian, propelled her. She dragged herself out of the cave, using her hands to propel herself, her wounded leg dragging heavily. The darkness of the forest was oppressive, but she could not stop. She followed the stream, the cold, bubbling water a guide amidst the darkness. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to go. Life, the chance to live, had been given to her by the tiger, and she would not waste it. As Ilara dragged herself away, leaving behind the echo of gunshots and the distant roar of the tiger, the forest seemed to swallow her, a dangerous sanctuary, but now her only hope. She did not know if the tiger would survive, if she herself would survive, but the connection between them was undeniable, a silent promise of life and sacrifice. Far away in her luxury penthouse, Cecilia finished her glass of whiskey. The private jet was ready. The driver awaited her. She looked at the city below, a sea of lights that seemed to applaud her victory. "Goodbye, past," she whispered, a cold smile on her lips. "Goodbye, problems." She could not hear the gunshots in the forest, could not smell the gunpowder and blood, could not imagine the mother she had abandoned, now fighting for her life, protected by a wild guardian. Her world was one of polished surfaces and convenient truths, where wild nature was just an image on a screen, and pain an inconvenience to be avoided. She stepped into the elevator, the soft sound of the doors closing, sealing her future, as distant and cold as the stars that shone over the forest where her mother, finally, had found freedom. Elara continued to drag herself, with every movement, every breath, the tiger's promise echoing in her heart. The forest was vast, unforgiving, but she was alive, and somehow she knew that the tiger, her guardian, had fulfilled its promise, guiding her to a safe haven, not of concrete but of hope, amidst life's savagery.